Well, you've never been asked a question like this one. You fielded some good ones. Did you clean your room? Are you ready for the next test? Can you go out on a date Friday night? You've handled some tough questions. Robust questions have come your way. Some of these questions have even rerouted your journey. Your reply to questions like, will you marry me? Do you want to enlist? These can set your course for years. Life asks some big questions, but none like this one. Call this one the king of the question jungle. It comes with teeth, especially since Jesus is the one posing it. You might brace yourself. Here it comes. Why are you afraid? At first blush, we hear Jesus ask that question and we think, is he serious? Is he kidding? Is this a legitimate question? Is he pulling a quick one, kind of like one swimmer asking another, why are you wet? But Jesus isn't joking. He is dead serious. He really wants to know. Why are you afraid? Well, if you really want to know, we have a few valid reasons. Have you watched the cable news lately? They disgorge tragedy every hour on the hour. Some idiot dictator is collecting nuclear warheads like fine wines. A strain of Asian flu is boarding flights out of the Far East. A tank of gas will soon cost more than the car it fuels. Why am I afraid? Well, because they're talking layoffs at work, slowdowns in the economy, flare-ups in the Middle East, turnovers at the headquarters, downturns in grades, upswings in global warming, breakouts of Al-Qaeda. Someone's injecting danger with steroids, and you're asking, why am I afraid? With all due respect, we would ask in turn, Jesus, are you serious? Jesus' followers certainly wanted to know if he was. Here's their story. They were caught in the stirring storm. Jesus got into a boat and his followers went with him. A great storm arose on the lake so that the waves covered the boat. Matthew remembers this pouncing tempest and this bouncing boat, and he searches his Greek thesaurus for a descriptor that explodes off the text like the waves exploded across the bow of the boat. He wants rain to splatter on the pages of our gospel. And predictable nouns for the word storm just won't do here. So he bypasses the terms that mean spring shower and squall and cloudburst and tempest. They don't capture what he felt and saw that day, a rumbling earth and a quivering shoreline. He recalls more than winds and white tops. This storm was and his finger works its way down that Greek thesaurus until it lands on the word that works. Ha! Here it is. It's a seismos. A quake, a trembling, an eruption of sea and sky. This term still occupies a place in our vernacular, doesn't it? A seismologist studies earthquakes. A seismograph measures them. And Matthew, along with a crew of recent recruits, felt a seismos that day on the Sea of Galilee that shook them to the core. Did you know that only 3 times does Matthew even use this word seismos? Once at Jesus' death when the earth shook. Once at Jesus' resurrection when the earth shook. And here in the sudden storm, He gives the story of the stilled storm equal billing in the trilogy of Jesus' greatest shakeups. Defeating guilt on the cross, death at the tomb, and now fear on the sea. Sudden fear. We know the fear was sudden because in this case the storm was, as the older translation reads, suddenly a great tempest arose on the sea. Not all storms come suddenly. Prairie farmers can see thunderclouds forming hours before they unleash. This storm, however, sprang like a lion out of the grass. One minute the disciples were shuffling cards for a mid-journey game of hearts, and the next they were gulping Galilean sea spray. Peter and John, seasoned sailors, struggled to keep down the sail. Matthew, a confirmed landlubber, struggled to keep down his breakfast. This storm was not what the tax collector bargained for. I wonder if you can sense the surprise in the way he links these two phrases. Jesus got into a boat and his followers went with him. A great storm arose on the lake. Wouldn't we hope for a happier second sentence there? A chippier consequence to obedience. His followers went with him, and suddenly a great rainbow arched in the sky. His followers got into the boat with him, and suddenly a flock of doves hovered in happy formation. His followers got in the boat with him, and a sea of glass mirrored their mast. But Matthew says, we got in the boat with him and a storm came. Don't Christ followers enjoy a calendar full of Caribbean cruises? This story sends the not so subtle and not so popular reminder, and that is getting on board with Christ can mean getting soaked with Christ. Disciples can expect rough seas and stout winds. Jesus said, in this world you will, not might, may, or could, but you will have tribulation. Christ followers get cancer. Christ followers bury their children. Christ followers face bankruptcy hearings. You see, it's not the absence of storms that sets them apart, but it's whom they discover in the storm. In the midst of the stirring storm, they find the unstirred Christ. A great storm arose on the lake so that the waves covered the boat. I wish you'd never heard this story and you're about to feel the full impact of this next phrase for the first time. But Jesus was sleeping. Sound asleep in the seismos. Disciples are bailing water. Jesus is sawing logs. They're searching for life jackets. Jesus is searching the back of his eyelids. Thunder roars. Jesus snores. He doesn't doze or catnap or rest. He slumbers. Who could sleep at a time like this? Some of us have trouble sleeping on the comfort of a fluffy mattress in a still room on a quiet night. Jesus is sleeping in a storm. Could you sleep? Could you snooze on a roller coaster loopity-loop? In a wind tunnel? At a kettle drum concert? Jesus slept through all three at once. Mark's gospel wades in on this story. Mark's gospel adds a curious detail explaining he, speaking of Jesus, was in the stern, asleep on a pillow. First century fishermen used heavy seine nets for their work. And when they built their boats, they would construct a deck in the back or the stern of the boat as a place to set the net in between castings. Sleeping upon the stern would have been impractical, no protection, probably already crowded with the same net. But that cubby hole beneath the stern deck was the only protected place on the boat. It was the most enclosed place in the vessel. So Jesus, a bit dozy from the day's activities, crawled beneath the deck to get some sleep. And he rested his head not on a fluffy feather pillow here, but this is probably a leather sandbag, a ballast bag. Mediterranean fishermen to this day still use them. They weigh about 100 pounds, and they were used to ballast or stabilize the boat, placed at the deepest part of the boat to stabilize it in stormy times. And so Jesus crawls into the cubby hole of the boat. Did he take the pillow with him so he could sleep, or was he so soundly asleep that someone gave him the pillow? We don't know. But we do know this is premeditated slumber. He had every intention of getting in some good winks. The all-knowing Jesus knew the storm was coming, but he was going to sleep. This bugged the disciples. I mean, it really bugged them. Matthew and Mark record their response. You're going to like this. In the Greek, it's 3 staccato Greek commands. It goes like this. Lord, save dying. English translations loosen it up just a little bit. But that's it as it appears in the original. Lord, save dying. No time for chit-chat. And their question is, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? The disciples are demanding and doubt-filled. The disciples are demanding and doubt-filled. Note, they do not ask about Jesus' strength. They do not say, Jesus, can you still this storm? They do not say, Jesus, do you have any experience with storms? They do not say, Jesus, have you ever seen a storm like this before? Or rather, look what they do. They raise doubts about God's character. Do you care? Do you even care? A couple of consequences of fear immediately surface. You see, fear can erode our confidence in God's goodness. Fear can erode our confidence in God's goodness. We wonder if He even cares. We begin to wonder if love still lives in heaven. I mean, if God can sleep in my storms, if His eyes stay shut when mine grow wide in fear, if He permits storms after I obey Him and get on His boat, fear unleashes a swarm of doubts, anger-stirring doubts, but it does more. Fear also numbs our memories. The disciples had reason to trust Jesus. By now, they've seen Jesus heal all kinds of sicknesses and all kinds of disease among the people. Did you know that by now they've witnessed Him heal a leper with a touch and a servant with a command? Peter, who is one of the people on this boat, saw his sick mother-in-law recover. And they all saw demons scatter like bats out of a cave. He cast out spirits with a sword and healed all those who were sick. Chronologically, these statements were made prior to the storm. Shouldn't somebody mention the track record? Shouldn't somebody review his resume? Maybe they forgot. You see, fear creates a form of spiritual Alzheimer's. It dulls our miracle memory. It makes us forget what God has done. It makes us forget how good God is. Had one of the disciples stayed calm enough to reflect on the achievements of Christ, they might have acted differently. They might have done what our friend Bruce Bowen told me he would have done. He and I were discussing this passage recently after breakfast. And I said, Bruce, what do you think you would have done if you'd have been in the boat with Jesus when the storm hit? He said, I would have crawled down in the corner and snuggled up next to Christ and tried to go to sleep. It truly is remarkable that none of the disciples had that thought, at least had that action. You would think they would think, well, if he's okay, I'm going to be okay. I'm getting as close to him as I can. But they didn't. They were doubt-filled and demanding. Fear can do that to us. And rather than enter the calm of Christ, fear demands that Christ enter the chaos of our world. Rather than enter the calm of Christ, fear demands that we demand Christ enter the chaos of our world. God, come here. Fix me, heal me, help me, rescue me. No wonder Jesus wages such a war on fear in his Gospels. I want to be very clear and say, as we begin this series on fear, not all fears trouble God. Not all fears are unhealthy. Certain fears are God-given. When you wake up in a burning house, a healthy dose of fright is God's gift to get you out of the burning house to save your life. Moreover, when you approach God, a healthy dose of fear, reverence, and respect of a holy God will guard your soul. The fear of the Lord is still the beginning of wisdom. God wants us to live with a holy respect toward Him. Fear of danger, fear of God, these can be healthy emotions. In fact, it's important for us to point out, fear is not a sin. Fear is not a sin. It's like other emotions. Grief and discouragement, guilt and anger. It's amoral. It's neither right nor wrong, neither good nor bad. It just is. You can be angry and not sin. In fact, that's the command of Scripture, be angry and sin not. You can be afraid and sin not. I don't believe we advance the cause of courage by passing around the gossip that says it's a sin to be afraid. No, fear is not a sin, but the inappropriate response to fear can be. Fear is not a sin, but the inappropriate response to fear can be. When you treat your fears with angry outbursts, or drinking binges, or sullen withdrawal, when you treat your fears with your own abilities, then what you do is you exclude God from the solution and you exacerbate the problem. And you subject yourself to a position of fear, a status of fear, allowing anxiety to dominate and begin to define your life. Joy-sapping worries, day-numbing dread, repeated bouts with insecurity that petrify and paralyze us. These fears are not of God. He did not give us a spirit of fear or a position of fear. No. And He wants to wage war on pervasive fear. In fact, His most common command is this: fear not. This may surprise you. It may surprise you to learn that more than any other command, Jesus tells us not to fear, not to worry, and to replace our fears and our worries with courage. The Gospels list, as far as I can tell, 125 Christ-issued imperatives or commands. Of these, 21 of the 125 urge us to not be afraid or do not have fear or have courage or take heart or be of good cheer. To compare, there are only 8 instances of Jesus commanding us to love, whether it be to love our enemies or to love our God. Second place comes in with 8 commands compared to 21 commands to not be afraid. Love is the most common command of Jesus, but it's not the most common. So if quantity accounts to any theology, God is very concerned with your fears. And His word to you is, don't be afraid. Don't live in a state of fear. Don't let fears dominate your life. Jesus doesn't want you to live in fear, my friend. He really does not. Why would He? How many of you have a better life because you've lived in fear? How many of you are happier or better human beings? How many of you have found that fear makes you a better husband or a better friend? The opposite is the case. Fear distorts us, and fear does to us what it did to the disciples. It causes us to question and forget God. Don't you care? And to seldom, if ever, mention what He's done in the past. When you look at the deck of the storm-tossed boat, you don't see any joy. You don't see any happy disciples. You don't sense any calm. You don't detect any peace. All these men are transfixed, paralyzed by their fear, and they have nothing with frustration. Is this any way to live? No, it's not. But it's the way that many people choose to live today. And I'm looking at some people whose lives are too marked by fear. Not the healthy fear, respect of danger and respect of God, but some people whom God would love to deliver from a state or spirit of fear. And since fear is such an issue in our lives, the question of Jesus in the seismos lingers on, because in the stirring of the storm, the unstirred Christ asks a stirring question. Jesus lifts His head from the pillow and He steps out from the stern into the storm, and He looks at the disciples and He says, "Now why are you afraid?" He asks this in the middle of the storm. He's going to tell the storm to be quiet in just a moment. But before He does that, He says to the disciples, "Now why are you afraid?" My father used to ask me this kind of question. When I was 6 years old, he let me stay up with the rest of the family and watch the movie Wolfman. Boy, did he live to regret that decision. Since we watched the movie in the den, I was convinced in my little 6-year-old mind that the Wolfman spent each night prowling our den, working his way in between the lazy boy and the couch and hiding under the coffee table, just waiting his preferred dinner of first-grade boy. And this proved problematic because to get from my bedroom into the kitchen, I had to walk right through the den. And it seemed that every night I would get up and I would want to get my midnight glass of milk. But to do so, I had to pass perilously close to the fangs and the claws of the wolfman hiding in the shadows. And I would take one step into the den and I would retreat. And I would walk directly to my parents' bedroom, step over to my dad's side of the bed, and I'd put my hand on his shoulder and I'd wake him up and I'd say, "Dad, I'm afraid." And part of me was in awe that he was asleep in that storm. How could he sleep with such a culprit loose in our house? And he would open one eye and he would look at me and he would say something like, Now why are you afraid? How could he not know? And I would remind him of the terror down the hall. He would climb out of bed and he would arm himself with superhuman courage. You know, he was never afraid to walk through that den. I stood in absolute awe of him. And I grabbed a hold of his t-shirt and I walked in lockstep behind him as he led us right past the monster himself. And he would wait patiently as I poured that glass of milk and I drank it, and I would look up at him and I would think to myself, what kind of man is this? The disciples did the same with Jesus. They looked up at him. They could not believe what they saw. Jesus got up and gave a command to the wind and the waves, and it became completely calm. He handled the great quaking with a great calming. And the sea became as still as a frozen lake. And the disciples were left scratching their wet heads. What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him. What kind of man indeed? Able to snooze in a tempest, able to silence the winds with a word, able to raise a compelling possibility. Here's the question. Do you suppose, is there any outside chance that God views your seismos the way my dad viewed my wolfman? Is there any possibility that he's willing to do for you in your fears what my father was willing to do for me? Is it possible that in raising the question, why are you afraid, Jesus is actually raising a standard that says you don't have to be afraid anymore? Could it be that you're about to put some fears in your rearview mirror and discover a Christ who is so strong that even the winds and the waves and the seismos of life obey him? And could it be that someday in the not too distant future, when you hear the question, why are you afraid? You look at the one asking the question and you say, you know, I'm not. And they watch you slide into the stern and snuggle up next to Christ and put your head on the leather pillow. And even if you can't get to sleep, at least you're going to start feeling better. May God give you courage over the next few weeks. And if he doesn't leave us fearless, may he at least help us to fear less.